When we take faith out, Christ out, then we as a world have to design systems, because that is the alternative to following God. In the man design, we don't make men have to account to another man. A quote from episode 16 of the Becoming a Man podcast with Dr. Masego. You can find this particular quote and where we discuss this 38 minutes into that episode, and also an hour into the episode as well. And so in this episode, I want to chat to us about defining manhood, or the model of manhood. Dr. Masego in that episode said something interesting, and he said, in our current day, I don't think we would consider Jesus to be manly. If we really look at his life, if we look at how he carried himself, how he operated, and what the current general acceptance is in terms of what a man is, I don't think we would fit Jesus into that bracket, into that description of being manly. That was interesting, and it brought to mind a story that I remember in my journey not so long ago, just a couple of years back. And so I have a dear friend of mine that also happens to be a leader as well, that I have submitted under their authority for many years, and submitted myself under to their discipleship as well. I remember, and I haven't shared this with this person, but in the earlier years of doing life with this person, and in particular submitting to their leadership and their authority, I felt that there was one area in particular in their leadership that I wasn't a fan of. I felt that they were a bit passive in their leadership. I felt that they didn't necessarily act or take action in certain scenarios or certain events the way I would expect a leader to take action, especially when there's adversity or stress, when something needs to be, when something is not going the way we intended to go in an organization, and you'd expect a leader to take action and to, course correct, set things clear, whatever it is, So I felt like this particular person was a bit passive in that, and they didn't necessarily have, they really displayed a time of like, hey, we're going to do this, until a season in my leadership came about where there were certain adversities and challenges that I was facing. And upon, going to him for counsel and sitting with him and, telling him about, this is what I'm going through, these are the challenges I'm facing in my leadership, and, what can I do or what can happen? At first, when I initially told him this, the first response was a chuckle. And I felt like this person is not taking me seriously. And then they proceeded to then share with me and say, basically, in a nutshell, you pick your battles. And when you have that discernment of knowing when to fight and when not to fight, when to speak and when to hold your peace, you will then have longevity in what you're called to do. You will have longevity in your leadership. So this scenario, and basically like the challenge and the adversity I was going through at the time, I was like, this particular one, I think you would be, because I shared with him, just for context, I shared with him, this is what I want to do. I want to confront, I want to do this, I want to confront the issue. And he says, hey, what you're proposing to do is actually not going to help. It's going to frustrate you even more. Rather, focus on the actual task at hand. Here's what actually needs your attention. Focus here. Don't worry about the adversity. Don't worry about the challenge. Focus on the actual task. Continue being faithful to that. Don't worry about that, because here you're going to be wasting your energy. And when he shared that, I honestly had a newfound respect for this person as a leader, and particularly as my leader that I'm submitted under. I was like, wow, now I understand what at first to me seemed like nonchalant, passive leadership was such a wise leadership. It was a leadership that considered the course before charting the course. It was a leadership that first sought counsel, used wisdom and discernment before actually acting, and I was reminded even of, I'm being reminded of a scripture in Proverbs that says that, there's counsel in the multitude of counselors. There's wisdom in that. There's safety. Yeah, there's safety in the multitude of counselors. And Jesus also then says it in a different way and says, which king going to war wouldn't first consider the cost of it? And which builder before building wouldn't first consider the cost before actually taking on the project of building? And that's the leadership I saw after that. I walked away from that conversation being equipped for the challenge I was facing and having a newfound respect, because the idea I had at first, I was like, I feel like you're weak here. I feel like you're not very direct as I would hope and want you to be as a leader, or I'd expect a leader to be. Walking away from that perception changed, and I realized that no, this is a person who actually considers, weighs the cost, and then finds what the best course of action is. And so, obviously, this goes without saying that now, in my leadership, I'm more slow to act. I take more time to actually consider and think about things, right? And so, some of the things that I kind of realized from this is that, just firstly to quote a scripture from John 12:49. Jesus is saying this, and he says, I don't speak on my own authority. The Father who sent me has commanded me what to say and how to say it. Right? Those are the words of Jesus in John chapter 12, verse 49. And what I could take from that was, I realized something in terms of humanity, and that is, our problem as humanity is we don't want to be told what to do. I believe that as humanity, we want to be our own boss. We want to decide for ourselves. And so it's frustrating when someone wants to tell you, when someone tells you that you should do this or don't do that. And might I be bold enough to even say, I think more so for men. As a man, like you don't want to be told, I remember with my dad, when I was growing up, he and my grandfather, my late grandfather, didn't have the best relationship, and they would clash quite often, right? And I remember after, I think he came home and he was frustrated and furious because he had another altercation with his father. And he was saying to me and my mother, I will never be like that man. That man, you can't tell him anything. He is so stubborn. Like, it's always his way. He never listens. I will not be like that man. And fast forward years later, even today, if I look at my dad, I'm like, you are your father. You are literally your father. I remember myself. I can share the very same thing, the very frustration he would share about his dad. I found myself right there in the middle of it, where I'm like, man, you can't tell this man anything. Like, when he's convinced, he's convinced. Like, my dad would come to me, I remember, those high school years, he would come to me and he would accuse me of something. And like in this case, I'm like, I'm innocent here. And I'd state my case. And in some cases, I even provide evidence. He would point blank just deny it and be like, you're lying. And I remember it got so heated because I would constantly be like, no, I'd stand my ground, I'd state my case. And my cousin one time came to me and was like, hey, piece of advice, stop arguing with your dad. It's frustrating him. And you don't want to keep pushing that button. And I did that. So I ended up adopting the mindset of, what, he'll come, he'll say something or accuse me of something. I'll state my case once And if he doesn't want to hear it and he stands on what he believes, then I'll just let it be, apologize, do what he says, and just keep it moving. And I'm sharing that again to highlight that I think more so even with men, I don't know if it's a pride thing where we don't like being told. We really don't like it. We don't like being told. I've started seeing it in myself as well. Like there are times my wife would say something and because she said it, I'm just like, and I kind of ignore it or, but if I'm being honest with myself, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with what she said. Like, or she'll push back on something. I'll come with an idea. We're going to do this. I'm like, I don't know if it's going to work because of this, that. And then I just feel like, no, I want to do it. I want to do it this way. And I've had to stop myself sometimes. Sometimes, hey, I'm not proud to say I've just continued with my stubbornness in certain things. And then later on, I'm like, you know what, she was right, but I don't tell her, But again, just to say, I think so much so with men, I believe we don't like being told what to do. And why am I sharing this? It's again now to say the person that, particularly in the Christian faith, that we are called to model. If we look at him, what did he say? I quoted it earlier in John chapter 12, verse 49. He says, I don't speak on my own authority. The Father who sent me has commanded me what to say and how to say it. And so if I want to submit, firstly, I'm submitting Jesus as the standard, right? As the standard of what a man should be. And so if this is the standard and we're seeing Jesus as a person who said what he was told to say, should we not follow that example, right? So, yeah, I've realized humanity, we don't like being told what to say. And then secondly, could it be that control is an illusion? As humans, we love the idea of control. We want to be in control. Like we dread not being in control of a situation, not being in control of our finances, not being in control of our emotions, not being in control of the situation at home, not being in control, of how things are going to turn out at work, whatever. We want that security of, like, for us, the idea of having control is it seems like euphoria and it seems like security for us, right? But when I think about it, I'm like, could it be that it's actually an illusion? Could it be that humanity, like humankind, can never and has never had control? Let me use this example. I have heard quite often, like when it comes to maybe progression in life, right? And I'm going to use the example of marriage in particular. I remember for myself when I first was like, saying, okay, now I want to get married. One of the first things that I was met with was, with what money? Do you have the money to get married? Right? Hey, you just started working. Like, what do you mean when I get married now? And even in conversations, with fellow gents, I've heard a few times, whether it's, deciding to start dating or getting married or having kids. They'll say, no, I need to sort things out first. I need to secure the bag. I need to get the car. Let me get my place. Let me get out of debt. Let me do this. Let me get past being on contract and let me get a permanent employment at work. Then I will consider getting married. Then I will consider having kids, right? And again, to this concept of, it seems like there's this illusion that let me control the circumstances first, then I will take a certain action. And then I remember I would present then this opposite, right? I'd say, okay, let's say you secure the bag, you get the car, you get the lovely apartment, house, whatever, you're earning the figures that you ideally want to earn, and then you get married, right? And then, God forbid, worst case scenario, 3 months after getting married, you get laid off at work, your car gets repossessed, and you can barely make ends meet. What are you going to do? Are you going to say, oh, babe, you know what? I love you, but I think we're just going to slow things down. Let's get a divorce. Let's just separate. Let me get my life back together. Then we're going to come back to that. Ludicrous, right? And again, just to emphasize, it seems like a very extreme and crazy example that I'm using, but it's to highlight just exactly how much we don't have control. We really don't. Guys, beginning of the year, like just being vulnerable, this household or Dubai household, we were steady in our finances, even the economy was doing well, things were good, like, hey man, we were good. And as we know, end of Feb, what happened with oil and all of that, and then oil prices go up, and we're still expecting another wave in terms of inflation. Now I'm like this, literally we're at the end of April and I'm like, this month's paycheck is actually looking a bit thinner because, man, prices already starting to go up. Hey, petrol has gone up already by the highest increase that we've ever seen before. And guess what? I didn't have control over those scenarios changing. I didn't have control over those unprecedented changes that took place. So why I'm sharing this, I'm saying this to say it could be possible that this idea of control is actually a myth. We never have, we've never had control in the past, and I don't think we ever will have control, but we kind of believe, and I want to say trick ourselves to believe that there is some form of control that we have over our lives, over the state of the economy, over how, things will play out. And I'm not saying we should be reckless in how we do things. I'm not saying that. Yes, you want to take the time to prepare. You want to be calculated in the risks that you take. You want to consider variables as best as you can before, taking on a project, going in a certain direction, deciding to have a kid, deciding whatever it is that you're deciding in your life. But what I'm saying is, let us also put on the reality lens, which is control actually is not something that we have. It's not something we've been gifted with. Circumstances will change. Change is inevitable. Crisis will come. What then is in our control is how we respond. It's the response that we have. It's the decisions we make when certain events take place. It's how we apply wisdom and knowledge to try and preempt and try and forecast and try to see, okay, this is what might take place, so maybe I should act in this way, right? And so, in all of this that I've shared, a principle that I've applied and that I want to present to us to consider is never find yourself without an authority. Never find yourself without an authority. Like I presented to us, I'm presenting Jesus as the standard of what men should be, right? And we see what Jesus, and he says, and even in different scriptures, he says it differently. He says, I don't do my own will, but my will is to do my Father's will. And like I quoted here, like I don't speak of my own authority, but the Father who sent me tells me what to say and how to say it. And so if Jesus submitted to the authority of the Father, then that should be a standard for all men, that I don't care how great you are, I don't care how wealthy you are, I don't care what positions you hold, have an authority that you submit to. You can be the president, you can be the richest man in the country, but find yourself at every season having an authority that you are submitted to. Because here's the thing, when you are not submitted to an authority, you become your own authority. And in the previous episode, I spoke of how the will of mankind is flawed. And so when you don't have an authority, you have no one who can speak sense. You have no one who can be the one who can show you your blind spots, who can steer you, who can guide you in terms of the course to take and how to go about certain things, right? So for me, again, in the faith, my ultimate authority is God, right? Being his word, his principles, right? But even so, I am submitted to the authority of other men, other people around. In my marriage, we've submitted our marriage under the authority of another couple that is ahead of us, a couple that has been married longer than us and has weathered storms that we haven't even weathered before so far in our marriage. We've submitted our marriage to that authority. Why is this? Because I'm understanding, based on the previous episode, that my will is flawed. I know that whatever I may intend, as great as my intentions may be, I may drift. I may find myself landing in a situation or going towards a destination that I didn't intend to go to. If I have authorities that I've submitted under, right, that I've allowed myself to be vulnerable to, then what those authorities can do is that they are able to speak into my life. They're able to guide me. They're able to point out to me to say, hey, this area is hazardous. Be mindful of this. Be careful of this, right? Because we may think, especially sometimes as men, we can sometimes maybe try to, give ourselves this false narrative or idea that this is new and we're pioneering something, right? But may I quote Ecclesiastes chapter 3, there's nothing new under the sun. And what that means is, yes, it's feeling new for me because I've never done it, right? Yes, I've developed a new product. But there's someone who's developed a product. There's someone who's started a business. There's someone who's done what I'm currently now doing. It looks in a different setting. They did it in a different time, whatever it is. But they have the wisdom. And so if I actually lean in to that wisdom, allow that authority to speak into my life, to help guide me navigating this terrain, they are able to now show me some of the pitfalls that they encountered in their journey. And guess what? I can now avoid some of the things that maybe they were not so fortunate to be able to avoid when they journeyed through this thing in their time, when they were my age, right? I can also, secondly, I can find myself progressing at a quicker rate, accelerating at a quicker rate than they did. Why? Because they are now being the guiding hand that they may have not had when they were doing this, right? So that's the importance of always finding yourself having an authority that you're submitted to. You're probably a businessman. Do you have another businessman who is like far ahead? Your business is bringing in 7 figures, but that business, their turnover is in the 8 figures. Are you leaning into that? Receiving mentorship, receiving guidance. You may be a pastor. Is there another pastor who you're in ministry for 10 years, but there's a pastor who's done ministry for 30 years? Are you realizing that wisdom and submitting yourself to that authority to say, hey, I need the help if I'm going to have longevity and do this successfully, right? You are father. Are you actually gleaning from other fathers who, you are a new father, but they have teenagers now? There's wisdom they can share. And so I'm saying this, and the whole point of what I'm sharing is that we are never meant to find ourselves in a space where we are our own authority and there's none above us. That is a very dangerous place because you start to think of yourself as the greatest. You start to think of yourself as invincible. And whatever it is, your way, your ideas, your thoughts, your decisions are brilliant, right? And so when you find yourself in that space, you're in a very dangerous place because you have no one that you can actually heed their words. You cannot heed their instructions. You are not humble enough to be able to take instruction from another individual. And so that is the main thing that I wanted to share with us tonight, is to say that, hey, here's the man of Jesus. And there's so much we can see from him, but just for the purpose of this episode, that we see that he was a person who was submitted under the authority of his Heavenly Father. And that everything he did was according to the instruction from his Heavenly Father. And so if Jesus was able to surrender and submit himself to an authority and recognize an authority and put himself under that authority, how much more do we need to do that? So as men, may we not find ourselves in a position where we have become so great in our accomplishments, in our status, in our success, that we do not submit to anyone else. We don't have anyone that we answer to. We don't have anyone that can actually hold us accountable, and we can actually be submitted to that authority, that would be a very dangerous place. And so let us ensure that we do be intentional and seek out the relevant authority. And maybe we can make it another episode where we can talk about how do we go about finding the right mentors, finding, the right authority to submit under, because it's not all authority that's good. It's not all authority that will have your best interest at heart. And so there's ways we can go about it, and we can be intentional with finding the right individuals that we can partner with, that we can submit ourselves under, and they can actually guide us and walk a journey with us with our best intent, with our best our best at their heart, and maybe that can be another episode. But the main thing here is that let us really recognize and submit to this idea of having an authority that we are surrendered to and that we are vulnerable to. So that is all I had to share with us for this episode. And so until the next episode, I just want to implore you to continue being intentional and knowing that the man you are becoming is better than the man that you are today.